And we are live. Welcome everybody to the Smart Building series. This is our last webinar in 2019. So thank you very much for joining today. Really appreciate it. And actually we're discussing a relatively interesting new topic, and that is BioCentric lighting. Well, new to some, not to others. Like for example, our guest today, Truls Löwgren from BrainLit, and I'll ask him to introduce himself in a little bit. And basically what today is about is some slides and an introduction from Truls about what his company is up to in this emerging field of lighting for health and well-being, and what could potentially be the impact that lighting can have on making our buildings healthy. So I hope you guys enjoy it today. And of course, we are both available for questions. The way you can ask questions is just to type them in. I'll receive them here, and then I'll be able to put them to Truls, or indeed, if you have any questions for myself, then we can answer them after the presentation. And then finally, I just want to say that you can subscribe to all of our content now on both YouTube and SoundCloud and even iTunes. So feel free to go and subscribe on those channels. If you just search for Smart Building series or memory, then you should be able to find us. And feel free to leave a review as well. That would be great. It would really help us out. So let's get on with today's presentation. Truls, welcome.
Thank you very much. Yes, so good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. So my name is Truls Löwgren. I am the Chief Technical Officer at BrainLit. My background, I would say, is LED development based on nanotechnology. So I've been working in that and the startup environments for about 15 years. Different parts of the world, and I'm originally from here, Lund, Sweden, and this is where I'm now back. So today I'll be talking about BioCentric lighting and how it can benefit health through lighting for the individual. So natural outdoor light environments are vastly different from the artificial indoor light environments that where we spend more than 90% of our time. Humans in our current form have existed on Earth for some 10,000 generations. And 9,995 out of those we spent outdoors, where you can have as much as 100,000 lux on a clear sunny day. Only the last few generations we humans spend our time predominantly indoors, where we are lucky if we receive more than 300 lux. And this is mentioning just intensity, which is one out of many parameters that are different comparing indoor and outdoor light environments. If you compare spectral distribution of natural daylight with traditional fluorescent indoor office lights, these look completely different. At the same time, the appearance of two light sources with these two spectral distributions may very well look the same from a visual perspective, although from a spectral perspective, they look quite different. So this has to do with how the human visual system works. We know from back in school that the retina has photosensitive cells. They're called rods and cones, where the cones exist in 3 different types, each of them sensitive to a certain color or wavelength range. As long as these different photosensitive cells are stimulated the same way by a light source, it will be perceived as the same color and intensity. In the early 2000s, there was a discovery that was groundbreaking for how we look at light and its importance to human physiology. It seems it has, on an intuitive level, always been understood that natural light play a big role for us humans. But what this discovery did was that it explained the mechanism behind it. So there is a third type of photosensitive cell in our retina that is called the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cell. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's a difficult name, but that's how it is. So what is interesting, other than its existence, is that it couples directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus in our brain. So that's another couple of difficult words. But what it does is that it impacts the production of hormones in our body. So it does not go to the image interpretation part of our brain, and therefore it does not play a role in our vision. So instead, through impact on hormone production, the signal from the retinal ganglion cell helps synchronizing our body's circadian rhythm or sleep-wake cycle. This is governing the 24-hour periodic processes going on in our cells and controls the immune system, blood pressure, body temperature, metabolism, and so on. We also know that circadian misalignment is correlated with many long and short-term functional disorders and diseases. So circadian misalignment, it means when your internal body clock is not in sync with your surroundings. So the discovery of this mechanism was awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2017. There is today emerging products and systems that aim to play on this mechanism in order to benefit human well-being. And commonly it is referred to as Human-Centric Lighting, or HCl. What is important to understand is that just as the rods and the cones are sensitive to different aspects of light, such as spectrum and intensity, the retinal ganglion cells are sensitive to another set of light properties. So light that look the same from a visual perspective may have very different impact on the non-visual light sensitive system. For the circadian system, the timing and the duration of light exposure also have different implications than for the visual system, and there exist both long and short time constants in this system. What you would like from a solution is the ability both to have a large impact on the circadian system and to be able to have a very small impact but still provide light. These aspects are important to keep in mind when considering solutions and products. And many of the human-centric lighting products available tend to focus on one or a couple of these parameters, but very few address all. Many light descriptions used in human-centric lighting today are visually relevant properties and not circadian impact relevant. There are many reasons for this. New metrics to describe impact on the circadian system becomes complex for the end user and require more than the average understanding of light and biology. There is today not a unified view on what is the correct metrics to use for this. With BioCentric lighting, the user receives light that is simultaneously tailoring spectra, intensity, distribution, timing, and duration, specifically to the circadian light sensitive system. We call it light for health, in contrast to light for sight. What is also more and more understood about the non-visual light sensitive system is that impact of light on health varies from individual to individual And these variations range from lens transparency and hormone levels changing through life to the pronounced spread in what impact specific light has on the response of the melatonin level. The melatonin level response to light could vary by 100x between individuals. So light impact and likely light exposure needs are individual. BioCentric lighting is a lighting system where light recipes prescribe what each luminaire emit at each point in time. With BioCentric lighting, health parameters are monitored to evaluate the impact BioCentric lighting has on users and feeds this back to the system for continuous tuning of the light recipes. Although the focus here is clearly health, one cannot create a system to benefit health aspects and forget about appearance and comfort. The health perspective is not replacing these traditional perspectives in light design, it's just adding another one. The light environments need to look good and it needs to be comfortable, because indirectly this also impacts how you feel. So anything else would be counterproductive to the purpose. From a light property perspective, one important such factor for aesthetics is color rendering. Whether you choose to describe that by CRI or something else, color rendering has a big impact on how you perceive an environment, colors, food, fabric, and other people. A very important property from the ergonomic perspective is flicker. And their IEEE 1789 is a tough and useful guide. We know that flicker could be detrimental to people's health, and it is very important to control. Keep in mind that if you set out to improve health, all aspects of your light environment should be healthy. With BioCentric lighting, we try to make life easier for the end user by composing technology and knowledge into a solution ready to use. In the BioCentric lighting system, each building block is designed based on the properties of light relevant to the circadian light sensitive system. Some learnings that we have done during the years we provided BioCentric lighting is that habits and expectations are very strong driving forces. When a BioCentric lighting system is taken into use, a common reaction is that it is a lot of light. So this impression wears off very quickly though. And 2 weeks into the experience, it seems almost everyone got used to it. In some situations, users were left without BioCentric lighting at a later point in time, when their company moved or they changed job or something like that. The clear message that we hear from these people in those situations is that they don't like to lose BioCentric lighting once they had it. The ambition we have is to increase accessibility for each and every one through packaging in comprehensive solutions, by standardizing light for health in a concept that dynamically incorporates science and new technology. Building automation systems tend to be more and more complex the more advanced they become. By avoiding building oneself into proprietary limiting platforms and communication protocols, and instead pursue dynamic, scalable, easily integratable structures, one can significantly lower the adoption threshold, and at the same time create more value at lower cost for the end user. We should refrain from putting the equal sign between advanced and complex, and we should break out of the building automation silo perspective. Addressing these topics are not fundamental for BioCentric lighting concepts, but it's fundamental for how BrainLit is taking on the challenge with our IT and telecom heritage. And it is fundamental for the way we operate and the way we do business. The industry shift to lighting for health is coming. All the logic is there. The question is rather how fast and how strong. Crossing the chasm requires both lowering thresholds and boosting value propositions. Making 20% savings on energy consumption is great, but a 20% decrease of sick leave has a completely different leverage and impact on the bottom line. Although that is not the only driver, it's a simple, straightforward, and universal one. But it requires ROI, and ROI requires quantification of impacts. Quantifying the impact of light, the light it provides is a core functionality of the BrainLit BioCentric lighting system. To BrainLit, mass adoption of BioCentric lighting is a purpose in itself, and it is core in our mission. So thank you for listening. I hope I have managed to influence you positively on the importance of light for health. And if you are in the business as well, I hope I managed to strengthen your conviction to go down this path together. Thank you again.
Great, thanks, Truls. And as I mentioned before, we've got plenty of time to take questions. So I guess that could be about some of the science that we just looked at there, or more specifically, of course, about the market, the opportunity, what BrainLit are doing, how this is all developing, how it might integrate with other building systems. There's a lot really to take in here. So yeah, please put your questions in. Truls, we have one question come in here for you. An interesting one. How important is this kind of solution for countries that already have plenty of daylight? So yeah. I guess you see this as more sort of having more impact in, let's say, Northern European countries, for example.
No, that's a very relevant question, and one that we get quite often. So the thing is, I mean, the value of this is pretty obvious in the Nordic countries, but we spend as much time indoors in other countries, and when you spend time indoors in very warm countries with a lot of sunlight, you tend to block out the sunlight, because the sunlight heats up your office, and then you need to use a lot of cooling to reduce the temperature. So you don't actually get much light in your office in those countries as well. So it is, I would say, equally relevant, independently on where you are.
Okay. I've got quite a few questions as well for you, and I mean, actually, some sort of more about some of the value propositions behind this. But actually, I think it'd be easy to start with some of the first slides that you showed, and of course, talking about some of the health aspects. And I noticed you mentioned, for example, this concept of circadian misalignment. But I'd be interested in sort of how how the light benefits us from that perspective. So what does that really look like? I mean, if just from a personal point of view, is this kind of like going to help us, for example, sleep better, or regulate the way that we are focus and concentration? Could you perhaps talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So when you impact something like health, it's always tricky to narrow that down, right? And actually, the primary factors that we impact and that we can also measure the impact on is sleep quality. And this is also very expected, since what this light exposure does impact in the first order is the production of melatonin and cortisol. So melatonin and cortisol varies naturally in a 24-hour cycle. But if we don't get enough daylight during the day, the contrast between on and off gets diluted. And the thing is, the melatonin should be as low as possible during the day, and it should be as high as possible at night. So by exposure to the right kind of light during day, you close the melatonin production, and you get a very low level during the day. And this helps the onset of the melatonin level at night, and that makes you sleepy and helps you to sleep well during the night.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I get that. So really, yeah, it should really on the individual level help you maintain this kind of sleep wake cycle.
Absolutely.
And therefore be more productive.
So it's not the it's not the only factor, but it is the most dominant factor. What we do, social interaction, for example, is another factor that plays a role. So we shouldn't have social interaction and light exposure too late in the evenings. We should reduce those to prepare ourselves for sleep and to improve the sleep quality.
Right. Yeah, I see what you mean. We've got some more questions coming for you. One which is quite technical, but let's see how we can answer this one. What are the control parameters from the building automation system that need to be adjusted from the DALI node in a tunable white light system to deliver a time of day for example, a factory worker at nighttime? Do you get that one? Are there, so I guess what they're getting at there is like what elements need to be adjusted in the light within the light system to be able to mimic a specific type of day?
Yeah, I think I get the question. It's not straightforward to answer because it's not only about the control system. So the control system is one very important component of a light solution for health. Equally or more important parameters or modules or components are the luminaires, but also the sensors play a vital role in this. So assuming you have luminaires that can provide the light that you need, it needs to be dynamic luminaires because you need to be able to change spectral composition and intensity, and you need to have, preferably you should have different type of luminaires with different light distribution to be able to achieve different light distributions in your environment. So really it's about spectral and intensity control, and to be able to do that in any point in time at all times. If we put it like that.
Yeah. A question here, actually, I was going to ask sort of a bit about statistics and data. Do you have any data on how much your product is going to increase productivity, or how you would measure that, if even? I mean, so for example, I mean, I was interested there when you talked about value proposition in terms of like number of sick leave days. Have you guys been able to do any analysis of how you've saved sick leave time days off?
Yeah, We have done that, and making studies for us is a cornerstone of what we do, and that includes both studies to look at the health parameters, but also studies to look at how we influence the financial bottom line and the operation of companies and other type of customers. As the difficult thing with answering this is that all of this is not official, and we do some studies that I can't talk about completely, but we do see significant decrease in sick leave with several of our customers. And this, of course, it changes with the type of environment that you're in. What you talked about productivity, for example, and in some situations or in some kind of operations, productivity is an easy factor to measure. In many situations, it's a very tricky parameter to measure.
Yeah, no, agreed. Yeah, certainly in knowledge-based companies, it's very difficult.
Yeah. So
I mean,
but sick leave is a parameter that we have multiple times been able to show improvements in.
Okay. No, great. And then I guess once you're able to publish this information, then people will be able to get it from your website, or maybe you'll put it on some scientific journal or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Question here, what are the receptors in the human body that benefit from the non-sight spectrum of light? Is it also the eyes, or would that be skin as well?
Well, skin plays another role in relation to light, where you have vitamin D from exposure to UV light. But what we talk about here, and the circadian impact, it's basically the cells in the eye that are the relevant ones. So in other species, there is other cells in other parts of our body that may play a role, but this is not completely understood at this point.
Okay. Yeah. Question here as well. Does your system emulate natural sunlight?
I would say yes, but it depends on what you mean by natural sunlight. Because natural sunlight has a very wide spectral distribution. It has strong UV emission. It has strong infrared emission. So we don't mimic all aspects of natural daylight. We mimic the part of natural daylight that is relevant to benefit your health and well-being.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because there are some aspects of it that you don't particularly.
Exactly, and it's really one of the tricks here is to understand which aspects of natural daylight are significant and which are not.
Yeah. Another question here for you. Do you tune your system differently depending on the type of building that it's installed in? So, for example, would a school be tuned differently to a hospital or to a factory with people working a night shift?
Yes, we do. We don't have one. We don't have a one-fit-all solution. So we adapt to what kind of environment it is and what kind of activity you have in that environment. So for an example, we have an installation in the neonatal ward in a hospital in Sweden, and there you have very different groups of users. You have the newborns, that are very sensitive users. You have the personnel that needs to have significant light to work well or function well. And then you have parents that come and visit. So in that case, we need to have a system that can adapt to all of those different scenarios with one and the same system. So that puts very high demands on the dynamic range of the light properties in a system like that.
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? Because it's quite a complicated environment in terms of being able to meet the needs of very different types of users in that sense. Yeah.
It is, right, and you have the. I mean, you could almost not imagine more sensitive users than new prematurely born children.
Right. Yeah. One thing in your presentation I also picked up on, where you talked about habits, I thought that was very interesting. So, you know, where that it takes that you found that it took time for people to get used to this, but once they had, they actually missed it when they left. I mean, could you talk a little bit more about the work that you did there? Was that based on a specific installation that you had, and you did some kind of survey, did you, of how people had found the experience?
It's rather an experience that we collect from all our installations and with all our customers, because one important part of what we do is to spend time with the customer after installation is done, to really understand how they use the system and what they like and things that they may want to change, and to understand their experiences. We also do surveys and studies, but this is more something that we pick up from just communication with our customers after installation. And this specific thing that I mentioned here is something that we see quite frequently, I would say, that that when a system is taken into use, there is usually a small group that see this as, oh, it's much brighter than they are used to, and basically just a few weeks later, a couple of weeks, that impression is completely gone.
Okay. And actually, it relates to the previous slide. Can we go back to the last slide that you showed?
This one here.
This I thought was very interesting. I mean, as sort of, we're a company that discusses a lot about, you know, integration of different building systems, and you know, so I think some of these concepts you're talking about here are quite interesting and don't just apply to, you know, to lighting. But I thought I was more interested in, you know, your impressions of kind of commercial real estate, commercial buildings. And I mean, have, for example, you been asked to install this in within, you know, like a wider context, so like perhaps a company that is doing this kind of human-centric lighting, and then other types of system, let's say, to manage, for example, air quality, or even, you know, basic temperature and all that kind of thing. What have you noticed or come across?
Yeah, well, we have done that repeatedly. So in the building that we are sitting, for example, that's 13,000 square meter, and that's like 130,000 square feet, I think. So office space with there's like maybe 20 different companies sitting here, and they have different operations, all of them, and and there's air quality systems, there's automatic curtains for or blinds, and there's a whole lot of those things going on here. But could you elaborate a little bit on your question?
Yeah, sure. No, yes, of course. Sorry. No, I just was interested in, so for example, this the building you're in that you're talking about. What is sort of the level of sophistication of integration? So, for example, with your system, yes, it does this specific thing of BioCentric lighting, but then also is there some wider control where you can also, like, simply if there's nobody in the room, you don't want the lights on, are they turned off?
So I mean, we only talk about light here, and but in that context, we also talk about sensors and and more specifically health sensors. But that's just one kind of sensor that we use in our system. So to start out with, there are sensors for occupancy, for outdoor lighting or outdoor light conditions, and a lot of different things in there as well. And we use those to make sure that we don't light up any areas where there's no people. But we also integrate the system for example, with a fire alarm system. So if there's a fire alarm going off here, the entire system, the entire building is shifting in between cold white and warm white. So it's very apparent when something like that happens.
Okay, that's fascinating. So
but I think there's a lot of potential to do much more and by integrating these systems, and we are really just done. I mean, we are actively seeking to do that, but we also notice that it's not always so easy to not all building automation systems are as willing to integrate with others as we are.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we've written for quite a few years about, and if anyone's interested, they can go on the Memory website and read about it. Yeah, I mean, integration is a big topic, and I can certainly see how your type of system, BioCentric lighting, Human-Centric lighting, whatever you want to call it, fits into a bigger picture. So I think that's fascinating, and I can see that together, of course, there'll be more value for the end user. And again, that sort of drew me towards on the slide we're looking at, where this pyramid where you're talking about 1 times utility, 10 times real estate, 100 times people. Maybe you could elaborate that a little bit. I mean, I think that are you talking about the value that it provides to these different?
It wasn't really clear. I can see that now. But so this is describing the costs in a typical company and how they are divided between different parts of the operations. So people is by far the most expensive and most valuable resource in a company. Real estate is somewhere in the middle, and then utilities such as energy consumption is only just a fraction of the cost.
Yeah. Okay. So of course, any impact on people that we can have then is of course more valuable to the organization. Has more impact. Yeah. Something else you mentioned in your presentation towards the end was this sort of breaking out of building automation silos. Again, I thought I picked that out. I thought that was super interesting. I wanted to give you a chance to elaborate on that, if you can. Is that something then that you've noticed? I mean, you mentioned that integration with fire that you've done. I thought that was super interesting. But I mean, are you coming across examples where you're not able to do things because of this problem of not, things being data being siloed, for example.
Yeah, certainly, and it's something that we are. It's a development that we are all the time driving to try to integrate as much as possible, and and to be able to use sensor data from other systems for the entire building to operate more intelligently. And it doesn't make sense. I mean, in many buildings, you see that there's multiple occupancy sensors in the same room because they belong to different building automation systems. And this is something that we really want to get away from, and try to facilitate that development. And yeah, it's a perspective that we have, and we hope that yeah, the building automation in general will move quick in that direction, because it adds a lot of value, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's again something that we've talked about. I think that well, we can keep our fingers crossed. Anyway, it's a whole other conversation, maybe a whole nother webinar. But yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Someone has recommended a book for everyone out there. It's called Health and Light by Johann Ott, published 1973. So there's some, if anyone, I guess, wants more reading on this subject, then about health and light, then check that out. Johann Ott, published 1973.
That's interesting. It may. Yeah. I doubt it speaks a lot about circadian rhythm, since that was not discovered at that time,
right?
Or at least the light mechanism and impact.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of not just, obviously we've discussed light a little bit. We've discussed some of the other, or I thought maybe you might want to mention some of the other environmental impacts. And I mean, have you seen any research on, for example, like lighting plus air quality plus temperature? I mean, are you seeing all of these different aspects coming together? So I mean, for example, do we have a picture now of what like an ideal work environment looks like?
I think we're much further when it comes to things like air quality. It's been around longer time, and yeah, people have been aware of it longer. I think light needs to develop much further.
Yeah.
To catch up. I think we have a fairly good idea, but I think there's still new things to learn, and light for health is a quite young field from a science perspective, and we need to learn even more. But I think we have. I mean, you could always argue that you should know everything before you produce a solution. But I think it's important to understand that we know enough to know what is much better than the light that we used to have. So I think we should develop those systems, and at the same time, we should drive the science forward in this area.
Yes. Interesting follow-on question to that, actually, and one that popped into my head. I've certainly noticed a trend towards like personalization of environment. So for example, we've seen some vendors bring to the market like apps for phones where you can perhaps customize your environment a little bit. In that context, can light also be personalized?
Yes, yeah, I didn't push on that very much in this presentation, but BioCentric lighting is actually light that is tailored to the individual's needs. So in that, you need to understand how different people react differently to different types of light, and to really tailor your light recipes to match an individual's needs, and then to be able to provide that light to the individual, preferably without the user or the individual having to ask for it specifically, or not necessarily to push any buttons, at least. So individualization is a very important factor in light for health.
Okay, yeah. No. Go on, sorry.
No, I mentioned or I show one study briefly in one of the slides, but it gets very, very technical if I dive into those studies too much. But it shows that there is a big spread in how individuals respond to the same light.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And we need to take that into account. Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone's actually asking, how would you determine the differences between individuals' lighting needs? But again, does that? I guess that gets quite complicated, does it?
It does, but I mean, it's a combination of knowing the theory behind it. So, and that has to do with chronobiology, for example, and by knowing that background, but then also measure directly the impact that you do. Together, that allows you to start to understand how different people respond to light.
Yeah. A couple of questions from me actually that I was interested in. Really in terms of like building type, vertical. I mean, have you guys in the work you're doing, have you identified a specific type of building where that you're focusing on, where you think that you can add the most value? So, for example, is that hospital? Is that offices? Is that schools? And have you formed an opinion on this?
We have. I mean, we focus on office buildings, on healthcare, manufacturing, but we also find that educational type of buildings is very, very interesting. I would say that the only thing that we don't focus on is residential. So that's it's always a balance between different aspects, right? You can argue that you would make the most impact with maybe at a daycare center, because you have kids that are that are gonna spend a lot of time in daycare and in schools, and they're young, and if you can have a beneficial influence on their health, that's going to be really important for the rest of their lives. But at the same time, you need to take into account how the decision process is and the buying process is done in these different areas. So there's always a balance between those, and what different stakeholders are part of the buying decision is also things that influence which areas you focus on.
Well, yeah, budgets are different, aren't they? Yeah. So I can see. I mean, what? So yeah, in a way, it's kind of two questions, isn't it? Like, there's one which is the commercial opportunity, i.e., and also then the opportunity to have the most impact. They're probably not the same, but unfortunately.
Exactly. I mean, ideally they would be the same, but you need to look at both factors and balance things, and but it's also an evolution. I think as awareness increases about this, I think this will also shift where you can apply this.
Right, and I think you mentioned earlier in your presentation about, well, I guess kind of like standardization. I'm assuming as you would think as this matures, right, there's going to be a more unified view of what biocentric or human-centric lighting is, and how it should be applied, and I guess the industry will have to come to an agreement on that at some point.
Yes, absolutely, and that's something that we actively drive.
Do you think that's coming soon, or is that a little way off soon still?
I hope so. I think it's important. Otherwise, it's difficult today for the end user to make decisions and to know what's best.
Yes,
so I hope so.
Yeah, because I mean, it is clearly a complicated subject, right? So anything we can do to simplify it for end users is a good thing, isn't it? Just to the audience out there, we've got a few minutes left, so if there are any final questions for Truls or myself, then please type them in. Happy to take them. Finally, from me, I mean, we did some work on looking at like market potential for this. I thought it's certainly something which is, in terms of like commercial opportunity, still quite nascent, the global market anyway, but we thought, potentially like the growth opportunity is very significant.
Yeah.
I mean, do you share that opinion? I mean, sorry, probably a bit of a layout question, but you know what I mean? Like, I mean, in terms of like how your business is evolving, or how you've seen, the number of clients that are coming to you, or what's your assessment
I would say that
at the moment?
Yeah, I think we're getting a lot of traction, and we see the numbers rise quite quickly, and I think that we're kind of at the point where people are contacting us for so we start to see a market pull, because awareness is picking up, and so I share. Or actually, I mean, I think that the common assessment of the market size is rather a bit too conservative, I would say.
Okay.
Even though they represent quite a substantial growth.
And would you say, I mean, in terms of what you're getting involved with or what you've seen, I mean, are we still in terms of what the end user is asking for? Are we still in like the pilot testing phase, or are we now, or are you seeing more kind of like bigger installations, and where there isn't, they've kind of accepted that this is, this isn't a concept anymore, or where are we?
Well, I would certainly say that we passed that. So this is no concept anymore. This is a full rollout solution.
Oh, and, right. No, I didn't mean from like in terms of your system. I meant like when you an end user. So if I draw an analogy, like we also cover occupancy analytics like systems. And that in a similar way, it's quite like a new, or for the last 4 or so years, it's been a new concept. And what we've seen is like people who own office space have sort of, one of the first things they've done is like maybe apply it just to one floor in their office, and then test, see what they're getting out of it. Have you seen end users take a similar approach, or are they now moving towards saying, no, let's put this into our new buildings totally?
So I would say that that's a bit mixed. It's about 50-50 maybe.
Okay.
So I think it is important for us to be able to provide a small installation that can then be expanded to the entire building. But we also see, like the one we're sitting in, and several other big offices in the area here, that it's a complete rollout from start.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So both.
Yeah. Okay. A question here. Have you sort of made any moves into the US market, or do you have partners there? So is there any? Do you have any experience of what's happening in the US? Is it behind Europe, ahead of Europe?
Yes, I mean we have a US office in New York City, so we are expanding there, and we have installations in Asia as well. So I mean, up until now we have focused on Nordics, but now we are expanding in several other directions. So well, I mean, I think that the market so far is slightly smaller in US, if I have the correct data on that, but similar. And I think I don't think the difference is that big. It may catch up, or Europe may lead a little bit. I think that could shift in a short time period though. So
good.
I think both are strong growing markets.
Yeah. Okay. And that kind of brings us to a natural end, I think. I mean, and if people did want, like, let's say if someone's in the US and they were interested in finding out more about BrainLit, where can they email you? Can they find you on social media? What's the best way?
Absolutely. So I think either way. So we have a US company and a US site. So I am not sure I can, from the top of my head. Well, so Oliver is our president in the US office, and you can easily find it on our webpage. His contact,
and that's
or go through our information.
That's BrainLit .se, right?
.com.
.com.
Okay. No, .com.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And just to finish off, everybody who's been listening, we've been recording this, so I will be putting it up on our website. You'll be able to find the recording there. That's both a video and also an audio recording. So feel free to share it with your colleagues. That would be great. So really just remains me to say thank you, Truls. Really appreciate you taking the time today to discuss what you've been up to and explain this BioCentric lighting concept to us. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. A great opportunity to work to spread BioCentric lighting to everyone. So I really appreciate that. So
you're welcome. And go on. Sorry.
Have a nice Christmas and holidays.
Yes, to everyone out there.
Right?
Yeah. Merry Christmas to everyone, and of course, Happy New Year. See you in the new year. In January, we'll have our first Smart Building Series webinar in January. Thanks again. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.